Get in. We'll figure it out. 4 words, shouted over a wall of rain, by a woman whose orange tent I'd first noticed exactly 9 minutes earlier. She was holding the flap of her tent open with one hand, while the wind tried to tear it out of her grip, and behind me, my own tent was a flattened, useless ruin with a tree limb through the middle of it, and the sky was doing something I had never in my life seen a sky do, going white, then black, then white again, the thunder landing so close it felt like it was happening inside my chest. And I stood there, in the rain, frozen. Because getting into a stranger's tent on the side of a mountain in the middle of the worst storm in a decade was not in the plan. And I was a man who did not do things that were not in the plan. I want you to understand that about me before I tell you the rest, because it's the whole reason this story means anything. I had a plan for that trip down to the hour. I had a plan for my entire life down to the decade. And in the 90 seconds it took a bolt of lightning to destroy my campsite, every plan I had ever made stopped being worth the paper I'd printed it on. And a woman I'd never met held open a flap of nylon and told me we'd figure it out. I had no idea, standing there soaked to the bone, that I was looking at the person who was going to change absolutely everything about the way I lived. If you've ever had your whole careful life blown apart in a single moment, and had to decide, right then, whether to trust a stranger or trust the plan, stay with me, because that was the exact edge I stood on. And if these kinds of stories find their way to you, do yourself a favor and subscribe so you never miss a new one, because I promise this is a night you'll want to hear all the way through. My name is Nathan Cole. I was 33 that summer, and I had built my entire life around the single principle that if you plan carefully enough, nothing can ever hurt you. I'll tell you where that came from, because it matters. When I was 14, my father lost everything. The business, the house, the savings, in the span of about 6 months, because he was a man who figured it out as he went, and 1 year the going stopped figuring in his favor. I watched my mother pack our lives into boxes, while my father sat at the kitchen table staring at bills he'd never opened. And somewhere in the middle of that, standing in a half-empty house, 14 years old, I made myself a quiet promise. I was never going to be a man who got caught off guard. I was never going to be a man who didn't see it coming. So I became the opposite of my father. I planned everything. I became a logistics engineer. That's a real job, and it's the perfect job for a man like me. I designed supply routes and delivery systems for a shipping company. My entire profession was, quite literally, anticipating what could go wrong and building a system so airtight it couldn't. I was good at it. I was the guy they called when a route was failing and nobody could figure out why. I'd look at it for an hour and find the one weak link everyone else had missed, because I had spent my whole life training myself to see the weak link before it broke. And I lived the same way I worked. My apartment was immaculate. My finances were bulletproof. My weekends were scheduled. I had been in exactly one long relationship in my 30s, with a woman named Corinne, and it had ended 2 years earlier for a reason she'd stated very clearly on her way out the door. Nathan, being with you is like living inside a spreadsheet. Nothing ever just happens. You've planned all the air out of the room. I told myself she was wrong. I told myself that for 2 years. The truth was she was exactly right, and I knew it, and it terrified me too much to change, so I doubled down instead. After she left, I planned even harder. I filled every hour, and the backcountry trip that this whole story hangs on was the most planned thing I had ever done in my life. Let me tell you about that trip, because the planning is the point. I'd booked a 5-day solo route through a remote wilderness area, high country, real backcountry, the kind of place where the trailhead is 2 hours of dirt road from the nearest town and there's no cell signal for 40 miles in any direction. I did it every summer, alone, on purpose, because a solo trip is a system you control completely. Your pace, your route, your camp, your food, every variable in your own 2 hands. I had spreadsheets. I had backup spreadsheets. I had laminated topographic maps with my campsites marked, and my daily mileage calculated, and my water sources confirmed. I had checked the weather every 6 hours for the 2 weeks leading up to it. And the weather, I want to be very clear, was supposed to be perfect. Clear skies, the whole 5 days. High pressure locked in. I checked it the morning I left the trailhead. 0% chance of precipitation. 0. That is the thing about the mountains that I had somehow, in all my planning, never truly learned. The mountains do not care about your forecast. The mountains make their own weather. And on the third afternoon of a trip that was supposed to have 0% chance of anything, I watched the sky in the west turn the color of a deep bruise, and I felt the temperature drop 15 degrees in 20 minutes, and I understood, far too late, that the mountain had decided to teach me something I'd spent my whole life avoiding. I made camp early, in a spot that wasn't on my plan, because the plan had assumed I'd make it another 4 miles. That was my first surrender to the mountain, and it galled me. I set up my tent in a stand of trees near a small alpine lake, in a little clearing that seemed protected. And I want to tell you, because I'm a man who notices these things, that I saw the other tent before the storm hit. A small orange tent, maybe 200 feet away through the trees, on the far side of the same clearing. I remember being annoyed by it. I'd come out here to be alone, and here was some other person in my wilderness. I didn't go say hello. I'm not the go say hello type. I noted the tent as a variable, filed it, and ignored it. That orange tent was about to save my life. The storm came in just after dark, and it came in like the end of the world. I've been in storms before. This was not that. The rain didn't fall so much as arrive all at once, in sheets, like someone was throwing buckets of it against my tent. The wind came up so hard the poles of my tent bent inward and I had to hold them with my hands. And then the lightning started, and it wasn't the distant flash and count the seconds lightning of a normal storm. It was right on top of me. Flash and crack in the same instant, over and over, so bright it turned the inside of my tent white and left spots in my eyes, so loud it stopped being sound and became pressure. I did the things you're supposed to do. I got off my sleeping pad, crouched on my pack to insulate myself, made myself small, and I lay there in the screaming dark thinking, with the strange clarity you get in real danger, that all my planning had brought me to exactly this, alone, on a mountain, in a storm that no forecast had predicted, completely at the mercy of a world that did not care about my spreadsheets at all. And then the tree came down. I heard it start, a crack that was different from the lightning, deeper, a tearing groan, and I had just enough time to throw myself sideways before a limb the size of my leg came down through the top of my tent. It didn't hit me. It missed me by maybe 2 feet, but it destroyed the tent instantly, snapped 2 poles, tore the fabric wide open, and suddenly I was lying in the wreckage of my shelter, with the rain pouring directly onto me, and the wind howling through the gap, and the temperature dropping toward the kind of cold that kills people in wet clothes at altitude. I was in real trouble. I knew it immediately. Hypothermia is not dramatic. It's quiet and it's fast. And a soaked man with no shelter in a high country storm at night has a window measured in an hour or 2 before he stops being able to think clearly enough to save himself. My plan had no contingency for this. There was no spreadsheet cell for tree destroys tent. I crawled out of the ruined nylon into the full force of the storm, and I turned in a circle in the flashing dark, rain hammering me, and I saw exactly one thing: the orange tent. A faint glow inside it, 200 feet away through the trees. I don't remember deciding to run toward it. I just remember running, stumbling over roots in the dark, the lightning showing me the way in white flashes, and then I was there, and I was shouting over the storm, "Hey! Hey! My tent's gone, a tree came down, I need..." And the flap unzipped from the inside, and a woman's face appeared in the glow of a headlamp, and she took one look at me, soaked, shaking, wild-eyed, and she didn't hesitate for even a second. She held the flap open with one hand against the wind, and she said the 4 words that changed my life. "Get in, we'll figure it out." And still, this is the part I'm least proud of and most honest about. Still, I froze. Because it wasn't in the plan. Because I didn't know her. Because every careful instinct I'd built over 19 years told me not to climb into a stranger's tent in the middle of nowhere. I actually hesitated, in a life or death storm, because a woman's kindness didn't fit my system. She saw it. And over the roar of the rain, she yelled, with an exasperation I would come to know very well. "It's not a marriage proposal. It's a tent. You're going to freeze to death being polite. Get in." So I got in. If you've ever had a stranger's kindness catch you completely off guard at the exact moment you needed it most, Take a second and hit that like button, so I know you're out there with me in the storm. Then let me tell you about the night that took my whole careful life apart. Her name was Ren. I got that much in the first few minutes, along with a dry fleece she shoved at me, and an order to get out of that wet shirt right now. I'll look at the wall. Hypothermia doesn't care about your dignity. Her tent was small, a two-person tent, which in backpacking terms means one person comfortably and two people who are about to become very well acquainted. And it was warm, gloriously warm, dry and lit by the soft glow of a lantern hanging from the top loop. And after the murderous chaos of the storm outside, it felt like the safest place in the entire world. I changed into the dry fleece with my back to her, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the zipper of my pack, which I'd grabbed on instinct on my way out of the wreckage. When I turned around, she handed me a metal cup of something hot. Drink it. It's just cocoa, but the sugar'll help. You're shaking like a paint mixer. Thank you, I managed. My teeth were chattering. Thank you. I don't. That tree. If I hadn't. Don't do the near-death gratitude spiral yet. You're still too cold to be coherent. Drink. Warm up. Fall apart later. There's time. It's going to storm all night. I drank. It was scalding and sweet, and it was, I think, the single best thing I have ever tasted. And I got my first real look at the woman who'd pulled me out of the dark. She was maybe 30, with dark hair in a messy braid and a face that was doing about 4 things at once. Concern, amusement, and a kind of steady calm that I found almost unbelievable, given that the sky was actively trying to kill us both. She was wearing a beat-up flannel and had a paperback splayed open beside her, like she'd been comfortably reading through the apocalypse. There was something in her whole manner, an ease, a lightness, that was so completely foreign to how I moved through the world that I almost didn't know how to process it. You're taking the lightning pretty well, I said, because apparently even near death I make small talk like an engineer. I love a good storm, she said. Not the tree through your tent part. That's a design flaw in the evening. But the storm itself? There's something honest about it. The mountain stops pretending to be a postcard and shows you what it actually is. She looked at me. You, on the other hand, look like a storm is a personal insult. It wasn't in the forecast, I said, and I heard how ridiculous it sounded the second it left my mouth. Ren laughed, a real, surprised, delighted laugh. Oh, you're one of those. You had a forecast. You planned this. You checked the weather. She was grinning now. Let me guess. Laminated maps? I didn't say anything. You have laminated maps. She was openly delighted. Marked campsites. Daily mileage. A spreadsheet. God help me. I bet there's a spreadsheet. There is nothing wrong with being prepared, I said, with as much dignity as a man can have, while wearing a stranger's fleece and shaking. My preparation is the only reason I had a dry pack to grab. That's fair, actually, she conceded. That's genuinely fair. But Nathan, she'd gotten my name at some point. I don't remember giving it. Your prepared, planned, laminated campsite is currently a tree ornament. And here you are in mine, which I picked because it looked nice and had a good rock to sit on. So the mountain doesn't seem to care much about the lamination, is all I'm saying. I opened my mouth to argue, and then a fresh bolt of lightning hit close enough to whiten the whole tent and shake the ground, and we both flinched. And I closed my mouth, because she was, infuriatingly, completely right. My system had failed. Her lack of a system had a warm tent with 2 people alive in it. There was no argument to make. Point taken, I said. Say it again. I want to remember this moment forever. Don't push it. She grinned and handed me more cocoa. We were, it turned out, going to be in that tent together for a long time. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and going back out into it was not an option, and there was nowhere else to go for 40 miles. So we did the only thing 2 strangers trapped in a small nylon room by a screaming storm can do. We talked. All night. The way you only talk to someone you're certain you'll never see again, which is to say honestly, with nothing held back, because there's no future to protect. And here's the thing about Ren that undid me, slowly, over the hours of that storm. She was everything I had spent my whole life being afraid to be. She was a wildlife photographer, which meant she made her entire living on the exact thing I'd built my life to eliminate, uncertainty. She went where the animals might be, and waited, for days sometimes, for a shot that might never come. She had no schedule she could control. She'd been doing it 8 years, out of a paid-off camper van, chasing light and weather and luck across the whole country. That sounds, I said, genuinely terrifying to me. No offense. None taken. It terrifies most people. It'd have terrified me too, once. She pulled her knees up. I used to be a very different person. Corporate, scheduled. I had a whole life plan. Fiancé, the ring, the 5-year goals, the whole thing. She said it lightly, but I caught something underneath it. I know your type, Nathan, is what I'm saying. I was your type. I planned everything too. What changed? She was quiet for a moment, and the storm filled the silence. And then she told me, and this is where the night stopped being small talk and became something else. My fiancé, she said. Daniel, he was a planner like you, except the darker version. Not just careful, controlling. It started as him being organized, having opinions, wanting the best for us, and it turned, so slowly I didn't see it happening, into him controlling everything. Where I went, who I saw, what I wore, what I ate, what I was allowed to want. He planned all the air out of the room, and I let him, because it looked like love, and it looked like safety, and I'd been raised to believe those were the same thing. She turned her cup in her hands. And then one day, about a week before the wedding, I was standing in a dress fitting, and the seamstress asked me a simple question. Is this what you want? Just about the dress. And I opened my mouth to answer, and I realized I had absolutely no idea. Not about the dress. About any of it. I'd let someone else plan my entire life, and I didn't know a single thing I actually wanted anymore. I'd disappeared. I didn't say anything. The rain hammered the tent. So I called off the wedding, she said, which he did not take well. That's a longer story, and not a fun one, and he didn't exactly accept it gracefully, but that's the short version. And I sold everything, and I bought the camper van, and I taught myself photography, and I've spent the last 8 years learning how to not plan, how to just show up and be present, and let things happen, and trust that I can figure it out when they do. She looked at me, and her eyes in the lantern light were steady and warm, which is a very long way of explaining why, when a soaked stranger showed up at my tent in a lightning storm, my first instinct was, get in, we'll figure it out. I've gotten really good at figuring it out. It's the only thing I know how to do anymore. And I sat there in that warm little tent, wearing her fleece, holding her cocoa, alive because of her, and I felt something crack open in me that I'd kept sealed shut for 19 years, because she'd described the exact thing Corinne had accused me of. You've planned all the air out of the room. Ren had been on the receiving end of a man like me, a man whose need to control everything had slowly erased the person he claimed to love. And I sat there and had to ask myself, for the first time in my life, honestly, was that me? Was the careful, prepared, bulletproof life I'd built actually safety? Or was it just a cage I'd decorated so nicely I'd never noticed the bars? Can I tell you something? I said slowly. That I've never said out loud? We're going to be in this tent until dawn, Nathan. Now's the time. So I told her. About my father, and the boxes, and the promise I'd made at 14. About Corinne, and the spreadsheet, and the air planned out of the room. About how I'd spent my whole life so afraid of being caught off guard that I'd never once, not one single time, let anything just happen to me. About how I was 33 years old and I had never felt as alive as I did right now, trapped in a tent by a storm that had destroyed all my plans, talking to a stranger, and how much that scared me, because it meant everything I'd built my life on might be wrong. Ren listened to all of it without once interrupting, which I would learn was not her natural mode, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I've never forgotten. You know what I think, Nathan? I think you didn't build a life to keep yourself safe. I think you built it to keep yourself from feeling the thing you felt at 14, standing in that empty house. And it worked. It kept you safe from that. But it kept you safe from everything else too. Safe from surprise. Safe from joy. Safe from a woman climbing into a tent with a stranger because it's the right thing to do. You made yourself a very nice, very dry, very well-planned little life. She gestured at the storm outside, and then a tree fell on it, and here you are. In the exact place you spent 19 years trying never to be. And you're fine. You figured it out. Or rather, we did. I looked at her, and I want to be honest about this next part, because there's a version of this story where two strangers trapped in a tent by a storm fall into each other's arms, and that isn't what happened, and I'm glad it isn't, because what I felt in that moment was bigger and stranger than attraction. Though the attraction was there, I'd have been lying to say it wasn't, watching this woman be so completely, fearlessly herself. But what I mostly felt was recognized, seen all the way down to the foundation, by a person who'd been on both sides of the exact thing that had broken me, and who was telling me, gently, that the thing I'd built to protect myself was the thing that was slowly killing me. We talked until the sky went gray. At some point, Ren fell asleep mid-sentence, the way people do, curled up on her side of the tent, and I lay awake listening to the storm finally, slowly, begin to break. And I thought about my whole life in a way I never had before. And somewhere in there, watching a stranger sleep, while the rain softened on the nylon, I made a decision that had no spreadsheet, no plan, no forecast behind it at all. I decided I wanted to be alive the way she was alive. And I decided I wanted to know this woman for longer than one storm. That should have been the beautiful end of it. It was not the end. Because when the storm broke and the sun came up and we crawled out of that tent into a wrecked, dripping, gorgeous mountain morning, the real trouble hadn't even started yet. The mountain wasn't done with us. And neither, it turned out, was Daniel. The morning after a mountain storm is one of the most beautiful things on earth. Everything is washed clean and dripping and impossibly green, and the light comes in low and gold, and the air smells like rain and pine and stone. Ren and I crawled out of her tent into that, both of us stiff and exhausted and strange with each other in the daylight, the way you are after a night of total honesty in the dark. We walked over to survey what was left of my campsite. It was a disaster. The tree limb had destroyed the tent completely, and worse, much worse, my sleeping bag was soaked through and useless, and a good portion of my food had been in a bag that the limb had crushed and the rain had ruined. I stood there in the gorgeous morning doing the grim math, and the math was bad. How bad? Ren asked, reading my face. Bad, I said. My shelter's gone. My bag's soaked, which means I have no way to stay warm tonight if it storms again. And I've lost about half my food. I looked at the map, the laminated map, which had survived, and which now felt like a joke. I'm 2.5 days from the trailhead. My planned route was 5 days. I don't have 5 days of viable supplies anymore. I don't even have 2. So you bail out, Ren said. Shortest route back to the car. The shortest route back to the trailhead crosses the river. I pointed on the map. Here. And after a storm like that, at snowmelt season, the river's going to be a problem, she finished. And her lightness dimmed, because she'd been in the backcountry long enough to know exactly what a flooded snowmelt river crossing meant. Okay, yeah, that's real. And here's where the mountains stopped being scenery and started being the antagonist of this story, because it wasn't going to let us go easily. That's the thing about real wilderness that all my planning had never taught me. It's not a backdrop, it's an active force, and it does not negotiate, and it kept raising the stakes on us the whole way out. We decided to hike out together. That decision made itself. I had no shelter, she had a 2-person tent, and splitting up in the backcountry after a disaster is how people die. So we packed up her camp and my salvageable gear, and we started down toward the river. And I want to tell you that walking out of the mountains beside Ren was, despite everything, one of the best days of my life. She showed me things I would have walked right past. A family of marmots, a hidden waterfall, the specific place where the light hit a meadow so that it looked like it was lit from underneath. She was present in the world in a way I had never learned to be. I'd spent my whole life looking at maps of places. She'd spent hers looking at the places themselves. And then we reached the river. It was worse than I'd feared. The storm had turned a knee-deep crossing into a churning, brown, roaring torrent, easily chest-deep and moving fast enough to sweep a person off their feet and into the boulders downstream. We stood on the bank and looked at it, and even Ren, who loved a good storm, went quiet. We can't cross that, I said. That's not a crossing. That's a drowning. No, she agreed. Not here. Not now. She looked at me. So what does the map say? And this is the moment I want you to remember, because it's the moment I started to actually change. I looked at my laminated map, my perfect, useless map, and I felt the old panic rising. The plan had failed, the route was blocked, there was no cell signal, no way to call for help, and a part of me, the 14-year-old part, wanted to sit down in the mud and stare at bills I couldn't pay. And Ren watched me feel it. And she didn't rescue me. She just said, quietly, "Hey, we'll figure it out. We always figure it out. That's the whole secret. There's no situation you plan your way out of. There's only the situation, and the two people standing in it, deciding what to do next." And something in me let go. "Okay," I said, "okay, the map's useless. Forget the map. What do we actually have? We have your tent, so we have shelter. We have some of your food and some of mine. We have two functioning brains. The river's going to drop. Snowmelt floods peak in the afternoon and drop overnight. So we don't cross today. We make camp here, high up, away from the water. We wait. We cross at dawn when it's lowest, and we figure it out." Ren was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. "What?" I said. "You just did it," she said. "You just stopped planning and started solving. Those are different things. You've been solving this whole time. You just needed the map to fail badly enough that you'd trust yourself instead of the paper." She grinned. "The mountain fixed you faster than I could have. We made camp on high ground. And that second night in the tent was different from the first. The fear was gone, replaced by something warmer and more dangerous. Two people who'd been through something real together, sharing a small space, hyper-aware of every inch of distance between them. We talked again, but softer. And at one point, telling a story, she laughed and put her hand on my arm and left it there, and neither of us moved, and the small space between us got smaller, and I understood that whatever was happening between us was not going to stay a nice story about a storm. But I didn't reach for her, and I want to be plain that it wasn't nobility. She'd told me the night before about a man who'd controlled her, planned the air out of her life, and she'd spent 8 years learning to be free. The last thing on earth I wanted was to be one more man who took something from Ren before she offered it. If anything was going to happen, it was going to be her choice, on her terms, from solid ground. So, I just let her hand stay on my arm, and let it be enough. And it was more than enough. At dawn, the river had dropped, just like I'd said. We crossed it together, roped with her spare cord, one of us bracing while the other moved, and it was terrifying and freezing, and we made it. And on the far bank we collapsed in the mud laughing like lunatics, soaked and alive and triumphant. And I thought, that's it. The mountain's done. We're on the home stretch. The mountain was not done. And this is where the second antagonist walked into the story. Because 2 hours later, coming down the final ridge toward the trailhead, we walked straight into a search and rescue team coming up. There were 6 of them, in the orange and gray of the county SAR unit. And at the front of them, to my complete confusion, was a man who took one look at Ren and went absolutely white with rage. Ren stopped dead beside me. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she breathed. "Ren," the man said. His voice was tight, controlled, and I recognized the type instantly because I'd spent the last 2 days learning to recognize it. "Do you have any idea? I've had a rescue team out here for 6 hours. When you didn't come out and make your scheduled check-in from the trailhead." "Daniel," Ren said, and her whole body had gone rigid. "What are you doing here?" Daniel, the ex-fiancé, the one who'd controlled her, who hadn't taken the breakup gracefully. And I understood, in a rush, several things at once. That he was apparently local, or connected to the SAR unit somehow. That Ren had left her route and return time with her mother and on her permit, like any sensible backcountry traveler. And that when she hadn't come out on schedule to make her check-in from the trailhead after the storm, her mother had panicked and called the man who was still listed as her emergency contact. "Your mother called me when the ranger station said you hadn't checked out on time," Daniel said, "because I'm still the emergency contact on your permit, the one you never bothered to change. I've been up here since dawn, worried sick, and you come strolling down the mountain." His eyes landed on me, and his whole face changed. With him. And there it was. The look. The math being done. 2 people coming down off a mountain together. after a night of a storm, disheveled, muddy, close. I watched Daniel do the arithmetic and land exactly where a man like that would land, and I watched the SAR team, 6 strangers, glance at each other and do quieter versions of the same math. His tent was destroyed by a falling tree, Ren said, and her voice was ice. He'd have died of exposure. I gave him shelter. We hiked out together because that's what you do in the backcountry. Not that you'd know, since you think a rescue is a place to make a scene. I've been up here all night worried you were dead. You've been up here all night because you still can't stand not knowing where I am. Ren's voice cracked, and I saw the whole shape of their history in it. This is exactly it, Daniel. This is the exact thing. 4 years and you still inserted yourself into my life the second I was overdue by one night after a historic storm. I didn't ask you to come. My mother shouldn't have called you. You are not still on my permit because you're my emergency. You're still on it because I felt too guilty to take you off the list, and I am fixing that the second I have signal. The SAR team was very studiously looking at the trees. And here's the moment I had a choice to make, and it's the moment I want you to remember. The old Nathan, the planner, the man who avoided every messy situation, who filed variables and ignored the orange tent. That Nathan would have stayed quiet, would have let it be their fight, would have been careful and neutral and safe. I did not do that. I stepped up beside Ren, and I looked at Daniel, and I kept my voice completely level, because I'd learned from her that calm cuts deeper than shouting. My name's Nathan Cole. A tree came down through my tent 2 nights ago, in the worst of that storm, and I'd have been dead by morning if this woman hadn't pulled me into her tent. She saved my life. Then she got me across a flooded river and down a mountain. You want to be angry about something? Be angry that the storm nearly killed 2 people. But you're not going to stand on this ridge and imply something ugly about the person who kept me alive in front of 6 strangers, because you're embarrassed that you're not her emergency anymore. She asked you a question. What are you doing here? The ridge went dead silent. Daniel stared at me, and I watched him understand that whatever he'd expected to walk down the mountain, it wasn't this. Ren, unafraid, and a stranger standing beside her who wasn't going to be careful for the sake of his comfort. One of the SAR team members, an older woman with sergeant's stripes, cleared her throat. Sir, she said to Daniel, you told us you were a family member. You're the ex-fiancé? Daniel started, because we don't run 6-person rescue operations off the concern of exes who won't let go, she said flatly. The subject is safe and accounted for. We're done here. She looked at Ren, and then at me, and something in her hard face softened by a degree. Glad you're both okay. That was a bad storm. You made good decisions. And she started gathering her team. And just like that, Daniel's whole scene collapsed, because the professionals had done their own math, and it didn't match his. Daniel left. Not gracefully. Men like that never leave gracefully. But he left, and the SAR team gave us a ride down the last stretch of dirt road to the trailhead, and somewhere in the back of that truck, muddy and exhausted and finally, truly safe, Ren reached over and took my hand. You stood up for me, she said quietly. You didn't make it worse, and you didn't make it about you. You just stood there, solid. She looked at me. The Nathan I met 2 nights ago wouldn't have said a word. He'd have filed it as a variable and stayed out of it. The Nathan you met 2 nights ago got a tree dropped on his whole personality, I said. I'm a work in progress. She laughed, and she didn't let go of my hand. At the trailhead, in the gravel parking lot with my ruined gear and her paid-off camper van, we reached the moment where the story could have ended, where 2 strangers who'd survived something say a beautiful goodbye and drive off in opposite directions to tell the tale at parties for the rest of their lives. I almost let it end that way. I stood there next to my rental car, and the old planner in me ran the numbers. She lives in a van and goes wherever the light is. You have an apartment and a spreadsheet life 400 miles away. This doesn't work on paper. There's no version of this that fits the plan. And I opened my mouth to say something safe and grateful and final. And then I remembered a tree coming down 2 feet from my head, and a woman holding a flap open in the storm, and I stopped listening to the planner. I don't want to do the beautiful goodbye, I said. Ren went still. What? I've spent my whole life doing the safe, planned, sensible thing. And 2 nights ago, a tree destroyed my entire plan, And the best thing that ever happened to me was standing in a tent telling me to get in. So I'm not going to be sensible about this. My heart was going like the thunder had. I don't have a plan for you, Ren. You don't fit in a single spreadsheet I own. You live in a van and I live in a box. And none of it makes any sense on paper. And I've never wanted anything the way I want to figure this out with you. So, don't drive off. Or drive off and let me follow. I don't care which. But don't let this be a story we tell at parties. Let it be the thing that actually changed everything. Ren looked at me for a long moment, and then she laughed. That same surprised, delighted laugh from the first night of the storm. And she grabbed a fistful of my muddy jacket and pulled me in and kissed me. Right there in the gravel lot, with the mountain we'd survived standing behind us. When she pulled back, her forehead against mine, she said, "You know I can't be planned, right? You know I'm going to drag you to places with no forecast and no cell signal and no idea what's going to happen?" "That's the entire point," I said. "I've had 33 years of knowing what's going to happen. It nearly killed me. Literally, this week." She grinned. "Get in then," she said. "We'll figure it out." That was 3 years ago. I want to be honest about how it actually went. Because there's a fake version where a planner and a free spirit fall in love, and everyone lives happily ever after with no friction. And that's a lie. And the truth is better. It was hard. We are genuinely, deeply different people, and we spent a good year learning how to fit two lives together that were built on opposite foundations. She thinks a plan is a cage. I think a lack of a plan is a cliff. We had real fights about real things. About how much to plan a trip. About money. About the fact that for the first year I kept trying to schedule spontaneity, which she pointed out defeated the entire concept and made her want to scream. But here's what we figured out. Slowly. The way you figure everything out. Together. In the situation. Deciding what to do next. She taught me how to leave room in the plan for the mountain to make its own weather. And I taught her, and this surprised both of us, that a little bit of planning isn't a cage, that having a solid base to return to is actually what makes it safe to go chase the light. She'd spent 8 years running from any structure at all, because the last structure she'd had was a man who'd used it to control her. And it turned out that a plan built with someone that you can change together is a completely different thing than a plan imposed on you. I wasn't Daniel. My careful nature, when it stopped being about control and started being about care, turned out to be something she'd actually been missing. We compromised on a life that neither of us could have designed alone. I left the logistics job, the great irony of my life, the planner who quit the planning career, and I do consulting now, remotely, from wherever we are, which means I brought exactly enough structure to keep us fed and housed while she chases the light. We kept a small home base, a little place near the mountains, because I needed a box to return to, and she admitted, eventually, that she'd been lonely in the van, in a way she'd never let herself feel. And we spend a good part of every year out in it, in the wild, in places with no forecast, figuring it out. Daniel took Ren off her mother's emergency contact list himself. In the end, sent a cold, final message that Ren read once and deleted, and we never heard from him again. Her mother, who I think had always felt guilty for calling him, came around to me slowly, and then completely, and now calls me the sensible one, which Ren finds hysterical, given that I'm the one who threw over my entire life to follow a woman in a van. The laminated maps still exist. I kept them. They're framed, actually, on the wall of our little home base, the topographic map of that wilderness area, with my perfect planned route marked on it in red, and my little X's for the campsites I never reached. Ren asked me once why I'd framed the map of the trip where everything went wrong, and I told her the truth. It's not the map of where everything went wrong. It's the map of the only trip in my life that ever went right, and it went right the exact moment it stopped following the map. I still plan. I'll always plan. A little. You don't undo 33 years in an afternoon, and I've stopped trying to. But now I plan the way you should, as a place to start from, not a cage to live in. And when the mountain makes its own weather, when the tree comes down and the river floods, and the whole careful plan turns to nothing in an instant, I don't panic anymore. I look at Ren, and she looks at me, and one of us says it, and we mean it all the way down. We'll figure it out. Here's the thing I understand now, that I didn't understand standing frozen in that storm, too polite and too planned to save my own life. We think that if we just prepare enough, control enough, plan enough, we can build a life that nothing can ever hurt. And maybe we can. But a life that nothing can ever hurt is also a life that nothing can ever reach. You plan all the air out of the room, and then you wonder why you can't breathe. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is for a tree to come down through the middle of your perfect plan. Because on the other side of the wreckage, someone might be holding a flap open in the storm, telling you the truest 4 words there are. Get in. We'll figure it out. And the whole rest of your life depends on whether you're brave enough to stop being careful and climb in. I climbed in. It changed everything. So let me ask you something before you go, because I've gone back and forth on it for 3 years. When Daniel showed up with that rescue team, was he just a worried man who still cared, doing the only thing he knew how to do? Or was Ren right that it was the same old control wearing a hero's coat? And be honest, if a stranger showed up at your tent in a killing storm, would you have opened the flap and said, "Get in"? Or would you have played it safe and stayed zipped up in the dark? Tell me what you think down in the comments. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know where you land on this. And if Nathan and Ren's night in the storm got to you, do me one small favor. Leave a like, subscribe so you never miss a new story, and I'll have another one waiting for you down the trail. I'll leave the flap open. I'll see you on the next one.